Please join me in welcoming Romy Newman, who will be introducing our first panel of the day.
Thanks, Erin, and good morning, everyone. As Erin said, I'm Romy. I'm the co-founder and president of Fairy Godboss. A lot of you might be wondering, what is a Fairy Godboss? So we think a Fairy Godboss is anyone who is helping women advance in the workplace by creating more transparency and by sharing information. We are now the largest career community for women. We were founded 3 years ago, and we're used by over 2 million women each month to share career advice and information and to look for jobs. We were founded because my co-founder was a job seeker who was 2 months pregnant. And she realized that she had a lot of information she was seeking, trying to get a hold of. Is this company good for women? Does this company treat women fairly? What kind of policies or programs does this company have in place that's going to help support women? And she couldn't find that out. So we decided we would crowdsource that information, and that's how Fairy Godboss came to be. And we feel really at home in this room because we are a for-profit business with a very strong social mission. And what's been amazing is that we see, as we've scaled and grown, we're now a team of 30 people, that social mission has really been an important part of helping us attract the best talent. So I think that in light of this panel that I'm here to introduce, which is building a purposeful team, I think that helps inform how corporations need to think about attracting the best talent and building successful teams, because the best talent is looking for purpose in their work, and they're looking to be part of, so purpose means success. Because our company's focused on gender diversity, I spend a lot of time thinking about this terrible statistic. Many of you may know this. The World Economic Forum says that we are 217 years away from gender parity in the workplace. Yeah, 217 years, which, if you spend a lot of time thinking about that, you might not get out of bed, or I might not. But so really what I spend time thinking about is, what could we do to radically compress that timeline? What could we do that would bring about gender diversity in the workplace, if not in my lifetime, maybe in my daughter's? And I think one of the essential cornerstones of that is integrating the pursuit of workplace diversity with business results. Study after study, things from McKinsey, from Credit Suisse, Morgan Stanley, Gallup, all these credible sources show that diversity of all kinds, and especially gender diversity, produces better results for teams. It produces better decision-making, more innovation, better return on investment, better stock performance. And so when companies sit down to strategize, I think they all need to be thinking first about, do we have a team that is diverse enough to drive the business results that we need to drive this month, this quarter, this year? And if we started with how diversity is so essential to business results, maybe 217 years could become 17 years, maybe. So, but I think in introducing this notion of, so why a purposeful team? Well, first of all, it's just better for the world. But secondly, when we look at what engages women in the workplace, more than anything, we see that women want to feel purpose in their work. And so for companies that want to engage more women to make better decisions and better financial performance, companies need to be purposeful. And so let me see if I can do this. Diversity drives success, and purpose drives diversity. So I'm excited here to introduce this panel, led by the very, very smart and talented Kristen Bellstrom, who's the deputy digital editor of Fortune, and she handles all of their women's coverage. And I strongly encourage you, if you don't receive the broadsheet, their daily email about women's issues in the workplace, I highly recommend that you sign up for that. But this is a great panel with very smart minds who will share ideas about how we build diverse and purposeful teams. Thank you.
So we are here to talk about a topic that I think is probably, on the minds of everyone in this room, which is how to build a diverse, inclusive, purposeful team. And that's a pretty urgent question, so I want to get right to it. But first, I'm going to ask my very impressive panel to introduce themselves. Why don't we start with you, Khalil?
Yeah, hi everyone. My name's Khalil Smith. I am the head of diversity and inclusion at a behavior change consultancy called the Neuroleadership Institute that works really closely to kind of organize research and trends and all the things that are coming out of science with practical application in Fortune 1000 companies.
Hi, my name's Jennifer Abbondanza. I am on the corporate diversity and inclusion team at NBCUniversal. I made the change in my career about 7 years ago. Prior to that, I was in banking, private equity, and strategy. And I came onto the diversity and inclusion team and created a data team where we really measure and track diversity in a lot of detail. I'm happy to be here. Thanks for having me.
Hi, good morning, everybody. My name's David Raper, and I head up corporate citizenship at IBM. In our global markets, which is the countries outside the Americas. And in that role, do a lot of community engagement, basically a lot of our CSR work. And prior to that, I worked at Housing Works, which is a very New York-focused not-for-profit whose mission is to end AIDS and homelessness. And there, I headed up a bunch of social enterprises, but also human resources.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Penda Aiken. I'm the owner of Penda Aiken Incorporated. I'm a local business. Our focus is workforce solution as well as staffing. We work with various clients in various industries and helping them to find the best talent for their organizations. So diversity and inclusion is very much a part of what we do in our searches as well as onboarding of our employees or their employees.
Okay, thank you, guys. So when we talk about building diverse teams, I think most of us feel like it's important to reflect, the diverse communities that we're coming from. But I also think, we live in a capitalist society, like it or not, and it's important to talk about what diversity can bring to a business's bottom line. And Khalil, I want to start again with you on this one because of your connection with leadership and science. Is there any research that you've seen that you feel like is, particularly underlines that point?
Yeah, there's a lot of research. I mean, it's difficult to kind of not find that research at this point. So McKinsey has done work around it. Deloitte has done work around it. Particular kind of institutions, Burson has done work around it. And pretty consistently, it has demonstrated that diversity, whether you measure that in terms of kind of gender diversity or ethnic diversity, has significant material benefits for the organization. Diversity in the C-suite, kind of the more you increase female representation, the more you increase kind of return on equity and return on investment. Some of the most diverse teams are the ones that generate kind of very particular returns inside their organization. There are even data around kind of over 50% of patents in new companies are started by immigrants that only represent less than 15% of the population. So they have an outsized benefit on kind of new technologies and new innovation as a whole. So you kind of have to close your eyes to not see some of the return on investment that diversity can bring. Yep. I think in a lot of ways it's more around defining what is the diversity that we're looking for and how do we integrate that in and really create an environment where that diversity can thrive and benefit as opposed to does it add value. Mm-hmm.
And what about from a corporate perspective? Like Jen, how have you seen diversity bringing something to the business at NBCUniversal?
Well, first I would say that it's a competitive recruiting environment. And for us, in order to get the best candidates, you have to, we find value in showing our commitment to diversity and inclusion because the candidates are doing their research. They know who gets it, they know who's inclusive, and especially early career employees or potential employees, whether they're diverse or not, this is a topic that's important to them. Beyond that, from a bottom line perspective, I go to diversity of thought. We were talking about this on the side, and creating an environment where people feel comfortable and supported to speak up and speak their mind. And in order to do that, that's where inclusion comes in, where barriers can be broken down so that people of all types who are sitting at the table feel like their voice is going to be heard. And I think that's what's going to cultivate the best ideas and the best decision making.
You mentioned recruiting, and I think that's a good place to go next, since that is sort of where you start with the team building. So Penda, you come in on this one. What can companies do to attract the most broad-based array of candidates when they're out there recruiting and looking for people to join their teams?
Well, it starts first with the job description, and it's backed up with the company's mission as well as vision. You have a combination of skills. There are certain must-haves that the individual has to come forth with, but then the other side is the culture, and how diverse is that culture so that the employees feel a part of that organization. So someone has already alluded to the candidate to do their research. What is that social responsibility that those companies have? And it goes beyond the lip service. Look what just was in the news now about CBS.
Yeah.
And that's from the top. The top 3 were fired. So when you really look at recruitment, you have to start with the company's organization first. And beyond, what are the skills, what are the tasks that the individuals have to do, what is the company culture? And how is that being backed by the leadership? So on the recruitment side, for us as a staffing firm, we don't always get that information. That's your intel that you all have internally within your organizations. So, but that's how we approach recruitment.
Okay.
And making sure that we provide the clients with the diverse talent, whether it be millennials or people with 15 years experience or someone's personality, because how does it match with the team that they'll be working with? All of those are important aspects of the recruitment effort.
And David, at IBM, what does your company try to do in your recruiting efforts to make sure you're communicating some of those things about the culture at IBM and thinking about even down to writing job descriptions, I imagine, and the type of language that you're using there?
So I think all of the things that people have talked about so far, are true within IBM. I think the biggest thing though is the projecting it out. So our CEO is really strong both on within the company. That inclusion is so important, and then sort of within the community or the economy that we live in, inclusion is something that we as a company should be taking forward, not just within IBM, but in also how we engage with legislators, engage with the community, develop our products, AI, those sort of things. So really trying to infuse it through everything that we do, and then people see that, and then it moves into the the HR mechanisms and the training for people before you recruit on unconscious bias, our values, those sort of things. But it really starts at the top with a view not just of the company, but of what sort of society are we as a company part of creating, internally and externally, and then you build mechanisms in the HR processes and the corporate culture processes below that to roll that out.
Jen, you mentioned the use of data.
I was just going to jump in.
Yeah, I'd love to hear a little bit about that in this context.
I would add that we look at data and use it to inform employees that touch, across HR, employees that are touching other candidates, applicants, hires. We use the data to inform across the board. So from a recruiting perspective, let me talk about talent acquisition. I'm not on the talent acquisition team, but they use me as a resource. They know that I'm available. I pitch myself to them as a bit of a consulting group where I can dig in on any population that they want to understand better so that they can develop their strategy appropriately and knowing where that group is coming from, knowing the strengths and the weaknesses. But we found an incredible appetite across the company to understand the numbers, whether the numbers are coming from HR or if they come to us for it. People want to understand where they are and want to start to look around the corners and avoid those accidental areas where, for whatever reason, and we can talk a long time about why these areas come up, they happen to have very few individuals in one diverse group or another, right? From my perspective, I see that happening because of the unconscious bias, because of all of the other things that stack up to that as people are doing their day-to-day job, they're making these decisions, but not purposely. And when we point it out to them, they're very quick to absorb that and help that drive their strategy going forward.
Yeah. And that is looking at, I guess, what technology and data can do to help. Does anybody on the panel have any concern about technology and data actually screening out people who should not be screened out of the process?
Yeah, I mean, there's quite a bit of kind of conversation that's happening right now around bias in AI, bias in the technology that we're looking to implement. Technology is created by individuals, and disproportionately right now, technology is created by younger to middle-aged white males. And so when we look at the barriers that have been in place for people who are not that demographic up until now, it's been about kind of who comes in. But when we look at integrating in bias into AI, one of the big challenges is as you create AI and it continues to learn, even the people that created it don't know at times what's going on behind the scenes. And so we've seen that, all great companies with the best of intentions, but Microsoft had challenges with their Connect that wouldn't recognize people of darker skin tones. Uber had challenges with their self-driving car that wouldn't recognize people with darker skin tones. There's been facial recognition. There's software that one of the kind of judges and kind of panels have been using to identify who is likely to commit crimes again, what we refer to as the recidivism rate. And it was cutting in half the actual recidivism rate of Caucasians and doubling the recidivism rate of Black people. And so all of those are biases that have been baked into a particular AI. In a lot of instances, they're benefiting, so they're moving in the right direction, but we need to not assume that artificial intelligence or machine learning is going to be this kind of silver bullet that's going to solve for all of it. It's an important step forward, but we also need to check it and understand it and kind of mitigate it appropriately.
Yeah. David, as somebody who works at a company that talks a lot about AI, do you have any thoughts on that?
Oh, I think it's a really important issue to be addressing. I think, as Khalil was saying, both if we go into this thoughtlessly, inherent biases in the data that these machines are trained on are going to be replicated. Obviously, the people building it are going to inject their own biases. We and other tech companies, we do a lot with MIT on how do you get bias out of AI, because there is a huge potential there. By bringing in more data and the potential for transparency, that's a great way to spot bias once you can see it. But you've got to be looking for it. Just about 6 weeks ago, we released a couple of really big data sets of facial images to try to get to this issue of systems just not having, basically, white males being overrepresented just in the data set. Yeah. And so as the machine's learning off that, it builds those biases in. And so we've released a couple of data sets, including one that were consciously curated to try to be inclusive data sets from which people can be using to train their machines and their systems. I'm sure they're not going to be 100% right, but I think us in the community sort of being aware of this, and this awareness is really heightening, that's a way to sort of iron that out.
Yeah. Let's take this back to our human unconscious bias, which can be something that can interfere with even sort of the best intended interview process, I think. Penda, do you have any thoughts on what companies can do to try to remove this from the interview process to the best of their ability?
That's an interesting question. Definitely training. Mm-hmm. So with us being on the staffing side, we do all of the finding the best talent. Yep. And then we arrange the interview. Then it's the hiring manager or that team that makes a decision. So I personally think that team or that hiring manager needs to be trained so that there are no unconscious biases, because you can have the best of intention all around in terms of the pre-qualifying, making sure that the candidates are fully vetted with the appropriate experience, background checks and all, but it's the hiring managers that ultimately make the decision. And it could be their friend, which has nothing to do with an unconscious bias other than you want someone that you personally know and you're familiar with, because ultimately that's where the decision finally lies.
Yeah.
Experience, all that being equal, it's now that culture, that fit. Who do you think will work best with your team? And unless they're coming into that with an unconscious bias, or if they do come in with that, then everything that's being done to promote inclusion, diversity is for naught.
Yeah.
So I think that the training is a real critical part of it, and that's where it becomes the leadership of the company, and how does that information get translated to the rest of the organization.
Yeah. Trainings, and particularly unconscious bias training, is something that we see research that it works, we see research that it doesn't work, that it can be alienating in some cases if companies don't handle it right. Khalil, do you have any thoughts on how companies can make sure that whether those trainings are effective in your, from your point of view, and how to best make them that way?
I've got lots of thoughts on that.
Okay.
I will
Give
keep
it
it
to us.
relatively short, though. There are a couple different things. To your point, the research shows that mandatory training married with poor training actually exacerbates people's biases and challenges, right? It makes us reject it because A, we're like, well, why am I even here? And B, it wasn't good training anyway. On top of it not necessarily being good training, there's a particular type of training that we would refer to as kind of a difference-focused training. We were talking a little bit before about the things that sometimes we think are really beneficial that wind up not being beneficial. And so you may have seen the ones where it's like, okay, women go to this side of the room and men go to that side of the room, or if you are heterosexual, go to this side. If you're not, go to this side. That difference focus from a neurological standpoint can actually create what we refer to as in-group and out-group, right? It highlights that we are very different than one another. And in a lot of ways, again, we walk away from that. Another one that is kind of done is kind of the blame, right? And again, nobody has ever done this, but where you put kind of the white males on one side and say, hey, it's all your fault. And you put the women and the people of color on the other side and say, oh, I'm so sorry that you weren't strong enough to keep up for yourself. And, if they would just stop being bad, then everything would be okay. And then you say, okay, now go back to your business and do better. And you're like, I can't even look this person in the eye anymore, right? It's super uncomfortable right now. And so the ways to really get around that are to be very deliberate about the training that you're putting forward, to create what we would call kind of superordinate goals. So what are the things that you're working on collectively that you all need to come together to do? And we have a phrase that we use quite often, and we're starting to see it in a lot of other places as well. If you have a brain, you have bias, right? That is just the reality. There are different types of bias, and we can pull those apart and understand them. But Penda, as you were saying before, like whether it's I'm interviewing my friend and I hire them, or I'm interviewing somebody that looks like my friend and I don't even really recognize that I'm going easier on this person because I love my best friend and this person reminds me of them. If I'm not aware of those biases, then I'm not going to be able to successfully mitigate them. And that's where things like the data come in to say, I'm not making good decisions. But there are really clear things you can do around the training itself that actually get people to recognize bias, become aware of it, but then we need to mitigate it. Awareness of bias is not enough.
Is there anyone else on the panel who has found a training at their company, or maybe one they've witnessed somewhere that they feel like really worthwhile, and something that more companies should be considering when they think about inclusivity?
I experienced, I was just reminded of it as we were talking, a fantastic one. I was about to hire someone, and you have to have done, it is mandatory, but I hope it's good, training before you hire someone. And it was a very short video with some question and answer, and you were sitting in a coach class seat in an airline. And different people, different skin tones, different genders, different fashion, different what they were carrying, walked down the aisle. And that you were prompted questions about how much you wanted to sit next to this person, on the flight, and some questions about what they were, and then it said, well, this is the truth about this person. And maybe it's just the basic step one, but it was super powerful in terms of, me too.
That's really interesting.
Yeah.
I would add, the awareness is so important. We're starting to incorporate unconscious bias training into some of our talent development programs. I think there's a healthy concern, though, because the data isn't proving that there's the be-all, end-all of unconscious bias training. I do think it's important to couple it with exposure. And if you can hit it right, where there's unconscious bias training, you're becoming aware of the biases that everybody has, and you're tuned into yours, and maybe you can play a game and start identifying your biases throughout the day because they come up all the time.
Yep.
But coupling it with being exposed to people in different groups and diverse individuals, whether it's through your organization or in personal relationships, that's really where I think the power lies.
Yeah. I think another sort of big, broad topic in this area is retention. You can you can do job postings that get you the right candidates. You can get those people through the interview process and hire them. But if you can't retain them, it's sort of all for naught. And a lot of companies have problems, keeping people of color, keeping women, keeping all individuals that are not, the typical white male. So, Penda, because you're working with a bunch of different types of companies in staffing, is there anything that you see that is sort of a common thread among the companies that do well with retention, that are able to keep these hires?
It's really how do you treat your employees? Do you have an open door policy where one can feel comfortable coming forth, whether it be to offer innovative ideas or to file a complaint? I think a lot of it is more on the building out of the office space. Now it's this open space. There's, this little social lounge, and there are the games and relaxation activities to keep people engaged. But inclusion goes beyond that. It's really now, how do you treat people? How do you communicate? What is that interaction like? And that, to me, is the crucial part that in so many instances are still lacking. So you may make the effort to hire a diverse population, whether it be veterans, older people, millennials, or whatever, but how do you keep them? And some industries are known to have higher turnover than others because of the nature of it's more of a profit center, and you're driven by your numbers. But ultimately, it's how do you keep the people that are there, regardless of what level of entry, experience, and that's where communication is critical. Some companies have, social events. They encourage the companies that tend to be more successful are the ones that really put the emphasis on social responsibility, getting your employees engaged with things that they like to do. How are they contributing to the community around them, and does that company represent, that community as well, or support that community?
Yeah. I feel like this inclusivity in culture is such an important topic. I kind of want to hear from everybody on this, so maybe we could go down the line. David, do you have any thoughts on how to promote that inclusive culture in a way that is going to help you retain your employees?
I think, whether you're so at the moment I'm in a really big company. I've also been in a company of about 500 people, Housing Works I was talking about. And even though they're about 1,000x different in terms of number of employees, very similar things happened there, and both had a very strong culture of inclusion expressed in different ways. But number one, it really did matter to the CEO. They talked about it all the time. Number two, there were clear values in each company that said, this is what it means at IBM, this is what it means at Housing Works. There was training and reinforcement below that as well. There were open door policies, all of these things. I don't know that it's rocket science. I think it's about deciding, do you want to do it? Do you want to bake it into your DNA? And I think at both of those companies, it was baked into their DNA. IBM, over 100 years, has been consistently about inclusion, whether it's fighting segregation in the, as we're building our factories, building global, a global culture. Housing Works came out of ACT UP, which was about, getting an ignored HIV positive population sort of like into the political discourse. It was who both of them are, and that leadership constantly from the top has been really important. And then if you're not the CEO, there's a bunch of things that you can be doing as well, creating those opportunities for engagement. I, for example, I've got a team all the way around the world, all the way, spread over the world. Often it's one person in each country, so it really can be quite isolating.
Yeah.
And you email each other and you call each other, and so I do a little Blue Monday video every morning, which is just a 5-minute max video of, it could be a work thing, here's something important happening at head office. It could be like, I'm moving this week. And so this last week's video was me in front of a bunch of boxes, just here's what's happening in my life. And it just gets a little conversation going amongst the team every week. And that builds a sense of community across different groups of people. So whether you're a CEO, whether you're a person, I think it's about saying, how am I going to bake this into my behaviors?
Yeah. And how about you, Jen? It's
such an important topic. This is a large majority of what people that are working in diversity and inclusion or HR or executives spend a lot of time thinking about. What do we do to create a culture of inclusivity and to retain our high potentials and do it in a way that's thoughtful about diversity? I agree. I think there's so many facets to this. We could talk about it for all day long. I agree communication from the top is so important. My boss is the Chief Diversity Officer at NBCUniversal. Of course, our employees hear from him all the time about diversity matters, but they also hear from our CEO, and they also hear from key executives, and they also hear from champions of employee resource groups. And it shows a commitment and an engagement for this topic. I'll add something that not to echo everything, but to add a new subject. One of the areas that we spend a lot of time in is working on programs to help to develop our employees. So that is an internal function that we do at NBCUniversal. We have a talent lab. We have general programs that there are tracks of, whatever point you're at in your career, there's going to be a track for you, and people love to get into those programs and network and meet employees from our very large company. And there's so much value in that. We weave diversity elements into those programs, but we also have programs that are focused on developing diverse employees and diverse talent. We're a content company. We've got NBC Entertainment, we've got film, we've got cable companies. We have diverse teams within each of those that focus on developing diverse talent for those platforms. We have writing programs, director shadowing programs, all of the like to help to break down the barriers and make sure that diverse talent is getting opportunities. So Khalil and I were talking about this earlier. I think there are a lot of tools in the toolkit. Nobody necessarily knows exactly which one is working the best, but you got to be using them all.
Yeah, yes, and. I mean, I think, I agree with everything that the group has said. There's one kind of neuroscience tool that we use quite often, and you can Google it, SCARF, SCARF, and it's all about the social drivers of inclusion. Okay. And there are 5 things, and I think, none of them are about the beanbag chairs and the cappuccino machines, right? That's not what's going to get people to stay. They're interesting, they're cool, but it's not the reason that you go into work every day. But the 5 are status, right? Am I respected and valued? Certainty, am I clear? Am I aware? Do I know what's going on around me? Autonomy, do I have a degree of control over the way I do my work? Relatedness, which is the one we normally go to around do I have a friend at work? Do I feel like I belong? And then fairness, do I get the credit that other people do or the credit that I deserve? And so when you, as a leader, pay attention to those 5 things, when you build systems around those 5 things, when you really focus on those 5 things, we feel this rush of rewards. I do feel valued, I do feel connected, I do feel like I know what's going on around me, and therefore those are the things that drive this feeling of belonging. Yeah,
those are all super fascinating. I wrote a lot of notes, you guys probably saw. I also want to talk about, a lot of our industries and a lot of our companies still run on some to some extent on some of the old ways that companies ran. Like there is still an old boys network in a lot of companies and industries. There's still a heavy reliance on having attended certain types of schools. And I'm curious if you guys have suggestions about how people in this room can try to make sure that those are not what is dominating who succeeds in their company. How about you, Jen? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Well, I'll come at it from a data perspective.
Okay.
And let me acknowledge that companies and individuals are all at different points in the journey with diversity. And if you're going to catch somebody who might be a member of the old boys club early in that journey who hasn't quite figured out the importance or gotten the memo, that's going to be a harder conversation than others. But we do, going back to the data, try to use data to promote a little bit of healthy competition. So when we're looking at our executives across the company, and when we tend to say, hey, okay, let's stack up our diversity metrics across the categories and see how our units are doing. Well, nobody wants to be at the bottom, and when people see some credit being given to groups that are closer to the top or showing improvements, that helps to have, to develop that conversation, to continue it. So we find value in the education and visibility of the numbers. And then all of the stuff that we're talking about with culture, the guys that are in the old boys network, they figure that out. They're picking it up through osmosis if you're doing it right across the company.
Yeah. Penda, do you still see that in some of the companies that you work with? Do you find that you have to open their eyes to those things?
Yeah, I belong to a few nonprofits, and one of them helps high school students, get internship jobs during the summer, and college students. And this was a law firm, a rather prestigious one. And he said they won't look at any candidates, that even went to Brooklyn Law School. Wow. And I thought that was a good school. So on one hand, it's about networking. And, we all network with certain groups. And when you talk about the old boys network, when my son was in high school, put him in a private school that I thought would give him a leg up. Or, we make efforts as parents to make sure that our children get accepted to the best colleges, not only in regards to networking afterwards, but also the learning, the experience. So I don't think any of that will go away. I think what we need to do is broaden that, as a woman of color, what networks can I participate in? With the elections going on now, they're saying the most women of color ever are running for, roles in the Senate and various, political positions. Look what's going on locally here. So we need to get more of that. So it's about how much time do we need to catch up. As an MWBE, there are all types of programs to help minority and women-owned businesses to compete.
Can you tell people what that is, just in case they don't know the acronym?
Yeah.
So it stands for Minority Women Business Enterprise. And so with a lot of the contracts as business owners, those companies have to now, it's 15%? Now it's 30% of any contracts have to go to people in our designated class.
Yep.
So those are the things that are going to enable us to be more competitive and to broaden the diversity and inclusion within various companies.
Okay, great. We have a little time for questions, if there are any out there. If you've got one, just put your hand up. We have a mic. We've got one right here in the middle.
So my name is Amanda Talty. I'm the president and CEO of the Tourette Association of America. We serve families and individuals impacted by Tourette syndrome and tic disorders. And in this conversation, I've heard a lot about diversity and inclusion as it relates to gender, sexual orientation, race, excuse me, but no real mention about those with disabilities, both seen and unseen. So I'd like to get a little feedback from you about what your businesses are doing to help move the needle in that area.
Great question.
Yeah, I can take part of that. You know, there's a pretty significant movement through a lot of organizations that are focused more on what we would refer to as neurodiversity. So folks on the autism spectrum. In addition to that, just diversity as a whole, really thinking deliberately around kind of able-bodied versus other, it's just across the entire thing. A lot of what we talk about, a lot of what we partner with organizations on and what they're focused on right now is this idea that if you're not actively including, you're accidentally excluding, right? So if you're not thinking really deliberately about everyone in your organization, and we were talking a bit before around for any of the things that we're talking about, there are what we would kind of passionately refer to as the fringes, right? There are people that are kind of the outliers. When we can identify the challenges that the outliers in our organization have and then build systems that support them and everyone else, we actually benefit. And so as it relates to something like neurodiversity, when you're interviewing, Penda, you were bringing this up before, a lot of the organizations like Microsoft that are driving that narrative are saying, well, why do we spend so much time thinking about whether or not someone looked me in the eye and gave a really confident response when what I'm looking for is, are they a really competent coder, right? What we're looking at is, I look people in the eye and give it a confident response, and therefore I'm looking for someone to mirror back to me what I think success looks like. But if we remove that, then we increase the number of people with a preference for introversion, right? We increase the number of people who are potentially on the autism spectrum. We increase the number of people for whom social interactions are not their normal day-to-day, or they're not as comfortable with them, who in a lot of instances are freaking brilliant when you do the thing that you're hiring them to do. And so the more we can be deliberate about exactly what it is that we want out of that job and screen specifically for that thing and remove a bunch of the other stuff that gets in the way around what school did you go to, what's your name, what did you do at high school, you know, would I hang out at the airport with you? Like, again, at the end of the day, who cares, right? And I think that's why the organizations that are embracing those things are seeing such significant returns, because my best friends, I would never go into business with, right? for any number of reasons, but partially because they like the same things I do and see the same things I do, and they will miss the same opportunities I would miss.
Yeah. Do we have any other questions?
Can I jump in on that one?
Yeah,
just quickly?
no,
People
please
with
do.
disabilities is certainly a big part of our diversity efforts. So we look at diversity across gender, race, ethnicity, people with disabilities, veterans, LGBTQ, and for all of those demographics, we have employee resource groups. We are thoughtful about the donations that we're giving to nonprofit organizations and scholarships. And when I talk about the toolkit, we apply it to all of them.
Okay. Go ahead.
Is it not working?
Hi, my name is Gina Liao, and I work at the Office of Diversity and Inclusion at the New York City Fire Department. And my question is, have any of your organizations thought about creating a structured training curriculum where employees need to successfully complete a number of training programs to kind of institutionalize the training at your organizations, and or developed a coaching curriculum where you kind of systemize ambassadors for change or coaches for change?
So I think like an institutionalized program of training or coaching.
That's a good question.
Specifically around diversity and inclusion or generally?
Specifically with diversity.
Yep. Yeah. Oh, do you want to go first?
Yeah, so because my company is small, but I can also speak to the companies that we service. And a lot of this starts with the onboarding process. It's not just about, telling the employee about time and attendance and what benefits they're entitled to, but it's really looking to plan out a strategy for their growth within the company, whether it be moving up or learning new skills or teaming with someone else that they can mentor them. It's really up to your organization to set that program and policy in place as to how do you want it to look and how do you want to ultimately get those employees included within the organization.
Okay. Sorry, go ahead.
We have a range of things that are structured, designed to improve the mindset of IBMers around diversity and inclusion. Some of them I've mentioned, like the training before hiring, etc. As part of our onboarding and regularly, it's in our storytelling. So I can't tell you the number of times that I've heard the story about how, at this state, IBM hired our first African-American employee, our first female salesperson, our first employee with a disability, our first female vice president, and then positioning that against, and then the legislation came 15 years later, not in a chest-beating way, but in a way of saying, if you work here, this is important to you as a company, and that's a very structured part of our corporate internal communications, as well as the, recruitment training, values training and managing for diversity sort of training, so yes.
Okay. Thank you all for your excellent questions. And thank you very much to our panel. I really appreciate all your time and some really great suggestions.
Thank you.
Thank you.